The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to AVPN webinar on investing in renewable solutions for water. My name is Prachi, and I manage the climate action platform at AVPN for Singapore. I'll take a few minutes to introduce the climate action platform and the session today. For those of you who don't know us, AVPN is a unique funders network committed to building a high impact philanthropy and social investment community across Asia. Currently, we have more than 600 members across 59 countries. Climate Action Platform was launched last year at AVPN's conference, and over 200 of our members have shown an interest in climate-related topics. The overall vision for climate action is to unlock capital in a more targeted and effective manner into climate solutions. The platform engages with climate leaders and potential investors to find new and impactful ways to move this capital. We also share best practices, experiences, insights, and solutions through our website, webinars, roundtable, and events on climate. Our session today is one such example. The platform also provides a central repository of investable climate solutions, showcasing SPOs, businesses, and projects for impact investors and grant makers through our deal share platform, bringing in solutions from alternate energy, land use, agriculture, and forestry to broader climate resilient and adaptation projects. This is how we work, and we engage with diverse set of partners and stakeholders. If any of these mechanisms strikes a chord, please do reach out to us through the link at the bottom of the slide. The webinar today hopes to bring together the water and climate community to explore solutions that would help effectively co-optimize water and carbon solutions through showcasing new technologies and markets that take into account the interconnection among energy, water, and climate. We are pleased to have two of our members based in India speaking today. Representing WaterAid India is Vikas Kataria, Director Resource Mobilization, and Sandeep Roy Chaudhary, Director VNV Advisory. Our speaker Vikas will showcase some innovative, sustainable water solutions that can be scalable and replicable in other regions, while Sandeep will take us through some new approaches to think differently about water infrastructure through the lens of clean energy and surface various financial mechanisms. Before we proceed, a few housekeeping instructions. We will not take any questions during the presentation, but we'll only open the floor for question and answers after the speakers are presented. Please feel free to use the console to type your questions while the speakers are presenting, and my colleague Kavita will raise the questions to our speakers in the question and answer sessions. If you have any further questions, please do contact us via email at pachi.seth@avpn.asia. With great enthusiasm, I now hand over the presentation to Vikas.
Well, thank you, Prachi, and welcome to everyone who's there on the audience side. And this is Vikas Kataria from WaterAid India. So today we will talk about essentially what WaterAid has been looking forward to and what are our interventions. WaterAid in India has been existing for last 34 years, and we've been kind of taking care of various aspects in terms of water, sanitation, and hygiene. So water is an overarching theme, as our name also suggests. Our vision is basically to cater to the most marginalized and poor across the country and across the globe. And we also have a vision where we say that everyone, everywhere have an access to safe water, sanitation, and hygiene, which is also a sustainable goal number 6. So we have a footprint in 34 countries across the globe, and we have footprint in India in 13 states, 44 districts, and 5 cities at this point in time. Our interventions are basically in the space of drinking water, wash in institutions, which is primarily the marginalized schools, Anganwadi centers, or which are essentially the centers for lactating mothers and infants, and inclusive sanitation solutions and hygiene. May I request if we could move on to the next slide? Yeah, thank you. So talking of the context essentially where we operate is water scenario essentially in India. Water in India is a huge amount of concern, in terms of India being particularly a nation which is hugely dependent on groundwater, and 80% of our water needs are met by the groundwater alone. If we just typically talk about what could be, the rate of water extraction, if we look at that, water extraction is particularly managed from a standpoint of, water in India has been extracted at a rate of 251 cubic kilometers a year, which is, if we put next two countries, which is China and US, both of them put together also extract less than what India alone does. If we look at the groundwater usage within the context of that, majority is being consumed by irrigation sector, and then very little amount goes towards domestic use, which is 9%, and 2% goes towards industrial use. 50% of urban water requirements and 85% of rural water requirements are fulfilled by groundwater alone. So that's the kind of dependence on the groundwater itself. Niti Aayog, which is the Planning Commission for India, released a report called Composite Water Management Index in 2018, and as per which there are very stark facts, which I'm just trying to present here to build the context. It suggests that 600 million Indians, which is almost half the India, face high to extreme water stress. 200,000 people die every year due to inadequate access of water. 40% of Indian population will have no access to drinking water by 2030. India currently is at 120th pedestal in terms of water quality index globally out of 122 countries. We're just at the bottom. If we also look at, 75% of the households do not have drinking water on their premise. They have to walk miles. They have to go out of their homes to get it. 54% of water sources are showing declining water levels. If we look by 2030, water demand will be twice the available supply, which would mean that 6% loss in GDP. So, and 70% of sources of water are contaminated in India at this point in time. So I'm sure it gives a very clear indicator that where we are in terms of water in the country itself, and we're staring at a very big problem in that sense. Let's look at some regional challenges in India. How we look at, we are very frequently observing variations in the rainfall patterns. Unseasonal rains, reduced number of rainy days, but higher amount of rains in that particular duration itself, which is undoing a lot of stuff for all of us, either in terms of floods or in terms of the dry spells on that, which has a burden on the drinking water part. Water quality is becoming a bigger issue. As I talked about, water quality has issues in terms of not only there are chemical contaminants which are found in the ground itself, like fluoride and arsenic, which are fatal, and there are also issues in terms of salinity or in terms of iron content or nitrates within that, which is also kind of putting health burden on a lot of Indians in that aspect. Now, looking at that side, it gets further compounded with bacterial contamination as well. It further has, typologies of different kinds, across the length and breadth of this country, because we are such a huge geography. We will find salinity as an issue in terms of the coastal areas. We will find low water table in arid zones. Some parts are having rocklands, maybe particularly southern and eastern and western parts, and eastern and southern parts have flood-prone geographies in that aspect. Let's talk of high dependence on vulnerable communities as well in terms of the traditional water sources. Many of them depend on springs or dug wells, which have very seasonality phenomenon or patterns on that. In dry times, they will dry out as well. So it leaves them completely, out of the zone in that case. Many pipe water supply systems do not work because of the dependence on the dependence on the power supply systems. Inadequate regulations enforcing the existing laws protecting fresh water resources. For example, anybody can sink a borewell and extract water. It's not a subject matter of state anymore. So similarly, water recycling or wastewater management is very poor, and sensitive water pricing is almost non-existing. So if we move on, I will just like to show some of the approaches which WaterAid adopts in terms of sustainable water solutions. how do we put our interventions in different contexts itself. So here we look at the approach which WaterAid adopts. We put excluded and marginalized communities at the heart of our work. We strengthen the mandated institutions on the very ground itself, which basically caters to various aspects of source sustainability. We also look at how we can build resilience within the sustainable structures on that. We look at the innovative solutions and leadership of women and youth within the context of our work as well. And best of it, we try and influence government for change at a larger scale through the outcomes of our projects per se, and we've been pretty successful in that as well. What do we mean by sustainability? When we talk about sustainable solutions, we look at the source sustainability. We look at how the sources of water where people or the communities are going to draw or extract it become sustainable, where they don't only extract but they also deposit. There are phenomenons or there are mechanisms to do that as well. Systems and financial sustainability should also prevail around that part, and socially and environmentally sustainable solutions are put in place. Like, we move to the next one, where we figure out that what are the contextual solutions which are provided by WaterAid in these aspects. So in the interventions where we try and revive the traditional water recharge and conservation systems. For example, dug well based recharge, aquifer mapping, which are basically the underground water pockets, and injection wells where we can recharge back through either the rooftop rainwater harvesting or other such mechanisms. We do collaboration with technical and research institutions in testing innovations which are contextually placed in the local setups, which could be scaled up and managed by the local communities itself. Supporting the government and also working with various institutions in continually monitoring and evaluating the water quality in the affected zones. We also build capacities of the local communities by forming collectives like self-help groups, volunteer groups, school management committees, youth groups, and operations and maintenance groups. Similarly, we also create local ecosystems where creating local economy where people could get trained in terms of like having masons, plumbers, dug well cleaners, water testing people, pipeline management, and so on and so forth in these aspects. Similarly, we also look at capacity building of the local government structures as well in terms of either water quality or identifying the gaps on the local level itself, and we have memorandum of understanding with various state governments as well. WaterAid also is recognized as a technical partner to the Department of Drinking Water and Sanitation. Particularly, government has a very ambitious mission, which is called as Jal Jeevan Mission, or essentially it's a water mission for this government, a central government's priority for this 5 years. And we are supporting them with insights from the ground, piloting new ideas, sharing some primers, rapid assessments, and research reports. We just supported ministry in implementing Jal Shakti Abhiyan to conserve and harvest rainwater in 11 districts itself. Let's look at some other solutions. We work with, when we work with different stakeholders, we also work very closely with business supply chains. We demonstrate and influence all businesses to integrate water along with sanitation and hygiene in their work, and show how minimal investments could enhance the well-being of the people in the supply chain and enhance the productivity or the business impact within the context of that. We also have been part of the Transboundary Water Project. We've been working across Nepal, Bangladesh, and India, working with those communities which are on the border and local governments in developing simple ways to manage water resources and minimize the risk associated with disasters like flood particularly. Similarly, globally, we bring out insightful research on water and its use. For example, we brought out a research report on virtual water footprint, which is one of the key aspects in terms of various production and economic houses itself. Sidewise, we also look at nationally and globally, we organize events to bring attention to the issue of water. We also bring collaborations with strategic funders like private sector, corporate social responsibility, bilateral, multilateral institutions, and foundations itself. This year itself, we did a Water and Climate Summit in London in March 2020, which was attended by a lot of business leaders as well as political leaders itself. So this is how we try and coordinate on these aspects itself. Giving you some examples of climate resilient water management practices which WaterAid has brought forward. And if we look at some of them, some of these are essentially, if we talk about district-wide water conservation measures, we did an intervention in a district called Banda in Uttar Pradesh in February to March 2019. And we started this campaign, which was spread across 471 Gram Panchayats. It affected 35,000 community members and mobilized around 2,600 trenches and almost 2,500 hand pumps and wells. Similarly, it revived almost 2,500 water ponds in the district itself. We had another intervention in a district called Kanker in Chhattisgarh state, which also affected 3,500 rainwater harvesting structures, which were created during that time. And also it was mandated that rainwater harvesting structures will be mandatory in all government buildings. Similarly, what was the basic reason for success in these geographies was created, were set in these places, and we had clear youth and women leadership articulated within the aspect and realms. Prachi, can I request for the next slide, please? I think it's not supporting. Yeah, so thank you. So training at district and sub-district levels were also organized within the part of that. Similarly, looking at community managed water supply schemes, which are owned, managed and operated by village communities itself, where the source sustainability is the heart of the program and the intervention itself, which means replenishing water supply systems, aquifer recharge, rainwater harvesting, increased storage capacity of water bodies and reservoirs, and desilting of the ponds. So some examples are in terms of village-based mini pipe water supply in village Zindapur in district Gaya of Bihar, which is functioning since 2017, and it has affected access to 57 households plus a primary school itself. It is a groundwater-based scheme which has source sustainability of traditional flood water harvesting system, which is called as PINE in this place, and also has an interconnectivity with sanitary dugwell as well. Deepening of these trenches is undertaken by MG Narega once in 3 years as well, which means it has a government linkage as a leverage as well on this part. The next one is in a village, in the district of Kanker, which is in Chhattisgarh, which is functioning since 2016, and it has impact on 85 households, and it is a groundwater-based scheme. The sustainability comes from rainwater harvesting, and personal borewells have been shut. These have been advised not to put there, which is preventing also the groundwater extraction, which means that sustainability is becoming much more superior in that case. Third one is in a district called Palakkad in Kerala, and in a village called Elapalli, which is operational since October 2018. It has impact on 35 households. It has, a shallow dugwell based scheme, which has groundwater levels monitored very frequently as part of the sustainability part. Hydrogeological surveys were conducted, and fractures, which are basically the fractures in the underground layers, were identified and connected to the dugwells. And then these trenches were designed for groundwater recharge. So this is how the groundwater recharge is happening in these areas itself. So this is where I will stop, and I will thank you all, for listening patiently to what WaterAid does. And I'm happy to answer the questions when it comes to the final session. And I will hand it over to Sandeep to take it forward from here on. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Vikas. A big hello to all of you. I hope you're safe wherever you are. Hope you're keeping well. So I just want to begin, Kavita, if I may. I'm not being able to move my slides. Okay, just a quick introduction to who we are. If I could just, yeah, thanks. So basically, I represent a company called VNV. We work across the gamut of climate change, not just water. These are some of the thematic areas that we work in, but all of it has a cross-functional requirement of water as well, whatever that we do with the rest of the thematic areas that we work in. We work in about 7 or 8 countries within the South Asia region. And we work with a large network of implementation partners, about 40 or 50 implementation partners who work on the ground with us to deliver these programs. You can find more information. I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide. You can find more information on our website, which can give you a lot of information in terms of the projects that we support or are working with. Kavita, sorry, I need your help again. Thanks. Actually, because the slides made a lot of, gave us a lot of information in terms of the context. So I just want to stick to that a little bit in terms of how I think the slides are moving a lot. So can we just keep it to the context? I'm sorry, Kavita, my mouse is not working at all. Thank you. So you know, we like to use this word massive global problem. It is a massive global problem. And I don't think the problem is so much the lack of water, it's the distribution of water. And for us and how we understand it is we have this clear demarcation, domestic use, commercial use, and within we use agricultural water, or we kind of bracket that under commercial use. So having said that, you know, what we are trying to solve, or what we're trying to work at, is looking at this energy water access network. What is going to happen is especially with agricultural water access, there is a lot of fossil fuels being involved in pumping that water and transporting that water. We are trying to figure out a way of actually putting in, because the requirement of water is only going to go up, and as it goes up and we have more displacement of population from rural areas to urban areas, we will have the problem of water distribution, and number 2, the energy intensiveness of that water distribution. And that's something which we basically are trying to work in quite extensively, is to bring that balance and look at that balance right now, and because this problem as it is, it's a problem now, and if we do not have clean energy to supplement the growth of the water access sector, we will have a bigger problem in hand, because as the climate change worsens, the water problem is going to even worsen even more. So we're trying to find that nexus typically with the work that we do and the work that we intend to do in collaboration with other parties as well in future. If you could go to the next slide, Kavita. So basically our focus and the way we work is we are a private sector enterprise. We need to have some form of ROI to whatever we do. We support programs or design programs based on the blended finance model. We're never really restricted to just one model, because we believe that all forms of finance can derive maximum value by putting in other instruments into place. So we believe that if there is a way. I believe that all programs first need to be designed and looked in a way where there could be different components of finance that attach itself to it. And we have seen, and we've worked with all these components that you see in front of you in that screen. And that's in some cases we use all of them, and in some cases we might be using about 50% or 60% of these. All of these kind of make a program workable with an ROI that does not have to depend on financial sustainability on only one source. And we have seen that, and especially post-COVID, actually, we would see a scenario where we cannot depend on one source of finance to be able to finance this transition of clean energy for water access. So we look at obviously private sector financing, carbon finance, CSR grants, the donor-based financing, philanthropic space, partial guarantees. That works very well. I will show you in a few of the next slides on how that is working for us. And of course, beneficiary contributions wherever possible. We don't say that it's going to be possible everywhere, but it is possible. and also in a way if it could also complement government-based subsidies or government-based programs. So to design programs which has different elements to it, community finance, private sector, philanthropy, etc., etc. So we bring it all together, and like I said, some programs might use all of them and some programs might use parts of it, but we're a big believer that it has to be an integration of different financial instruments. Kavita? Okay, so basically this is just a slide which illustrates more or less that what I was saying in the previous slide. That the financial service institutions, you use bank, NBFCs, MFIs, cooperatives, community organizations, all of it, you know, and then you have the value chains, which is basically domestic users, farmers, as far as we believe that's a big sector when we're talking about the energy nexus between water and clean energy. And of course, on the other side, you have the business and the technical specialized sectors, of course. Kavita, I mean, I think. Okay, no, sorry, the previous slide, Kavita, sorry. Yeah, we are a big believer in retrofitting. I'll tell you why, because a lot of infrastructure, water is not something new. Water access is not something new. People have been working for decades on water, if not for centuries. And there are existing infrastructures that are there within different countries and different setups. We are a firm believer in actually leveraging that existing system and not letting it be. There are systems which were deployed 20 years back, 30 years back, which are not working anymore. There are distribution networks. Retrofitting with latest gadgets and technology could be a way forward. A, it decreases the cost, which is a significant thing to look at. And number B, we can then piggy ride on the existing distribution setups that were there and try and work with water management within an existing infrastructure setup. And that we're a big believer in, and I will try and demonstrate that in future slides as well. When we talk about clean energy for water access, we also use mitigation finance, or carbon finance as we might call it, as a key component. Because there's a renewable energy component, there is a CO2 reduction as well. We use that quite extensively as well as one of the financing mechanisms. And I keep saying as one of them because, like, for us, the blendedness of the project is very, very important. Again, we are a private enterprise. We would want either us or our investors to have a payback period of within 2.5 to 4 years. Typically, all our financial models will have 4 years. Some might spill over to 5 years, but on average, this is what we're looking at, or this is what we think can be achieved through a blended approach. Donors, even if they do come in, and if we have donors in terms of non-return based donor, if I may, are to extract maximum value for their buck. I mean, we keep saying that we don't need 100% finance for most projects. It can be broken down into components, and different partners can come together with different resources, even financial resources. That's a very, very important part of how we look at programs. Is at times even a 20% contribution is the financial gap for a program working and not working, and to make it sustainable or non-sustainable. And somehow a lot of our focus goes into identifying those little gaps that exist within the entire financial landscape of a program. It goes without saying, community participation, empowerment. If it's water, it has to do with community participation, without which there is no real project. I mean, there's no way we can structure any kind of financial investment. Kavita, please. I'm just going to illustrate some case studies. I'm going to quickly run through them because I want to spend some time, on the slides at the end of the presentation. But this is just to demonstrate on how we look at the blended approach that we're looking at. This is a project, this is solar filtration units. And if you look at the images, and I'm just going to quickly go through them. If you look at when it was installed, this was installed in 2012-ish, actually. And look at what it is now on the right-hand bottom picture. Now, this is an existing system which is completely defunct. We believe that, and there are around 150 odd systems like this that we've identified. And we believe that if we work with the local administration and kind of retrofit and refurbish these systems, it will save a lot of money. These communities who are struggling for water now will be able to, because the turnaround time also is cut down significantly because there is an existing infrastructure. This is just an example of how we always are on the lookout for existing infrastructure on the water side. Of course, because this is powered by solar, that also solves our problem of that energy nexus that we keep talking about, water and energy. So this is one of the programs that we're looking at. Kavita, next slide, please. Yeah. So the model integrates the budget consideration. It's, a typical new system would cost me about 120,000. This would cost me about 30,000. Consumers are willing to pay. I mean, if you keep it to a level which is, this is absolutely minimal. If you look at 3 USD cents per liter. So if you look at, of course, there are surveys done, and I'm not saying that this is a uniformity across, this is Bangladesh, but this could be true for any African country as well in terms of the affordability. We kind of sometimes underestimate the affordability of people as well, because this is clean water. And at some point, there are communities which are significantly aware of why clean water is quite necessary for their existence. So, and if you can price it at a way that, and that's something that we do, where there's a socioeconomic analysis done, and affordability is always gauged before we get into a project. Typically, this would show payback within about 4 years with consumers who are paying back. Because of the cost being low is why the payback is higher, just that point. Quickly, Kavita, next slide, please. So this is a borehole retrofitting. Vikas alluded to boreholes, but again, we see a problem with water management and not so much water depletion. Depletion has happened, obviously, but if it managed better, it could work. This is something, again, existing infrastructure. There were old boreholes that existed. We are basically just retrofitting all of them. This is about 1,000 boreholes that will be retrofitted in a few years' time. Again, there is a payability from the community that can be looked at before retrofitting, and there are 1,000 of these actually, which is a significant number, which can then look at almost 10,000 households and more actually to be. Kavita, I'm not being able to move it. Okay. Again, quickly, cost of borehole refurbishment for us comes to about 1,200 USD. Again, communities paying back. And this is obviously can be supplemented by other sources of income as well for the project. I'm just giving you the whole picture, saying that, we do see payability or returns from most projects if it's done smartly enough. These figures, I think, that will be on the PPT. You could go, so 100 households pay an amount, which basically, if we calculate it, back calculate, our payback period is about 2.5, worst case scenario, 3 years. Next slide, Kavita, please. This is a program that a lot of people might be knowing of. We are involved in it in a very small way, but this is a very clear case of solar pumps being used in Kutch area of Gujarat, where again this is as an example of the blendedness of the finance that we talk about. Some of you who are attending this might be knowing of this program. It's great. But then this if you could go to the next slide, please, Kavita. This is solar PV for salt farmers. They need a lot of water. Next slide, please, Kavita. Next, please. Yeah, this one. So again, this has partial guarantee, carbon finance, NGO guarantees, as well as different microfinance and conventional finance. It's basically that. I have to go to the earlier slide. I'm sorry, Kavita. Yeah, so I'm going to quickly go through it. There is a facilitating of the loan. The loan comes with a guarantee from the NGO, as well as a partial guarantee, first loss guarantee from a financial investor or financial player. That partial guarantee leads to the fact that these people, without any form of credit history, can still access that loan at a subsidized interest rate. And that interest rate is further subsidized by carbon finance that is derived out of the solar pumps working. So it becomes, that is this typical case of self-help groups, blended finance, different kinds of partial guarantee, and the conventional financial system also working in the same, in the nexus. So this is a very good case study as well. If you can move on to the next few, Kavita. The next one. This is the solar filtration for safe drinking water. This is, again, a solar-based drinking filtration water, non-RO based, non-RO because we like to keep technology, some which work on some technology, some are not, in terms of diversification of technologies was the word I was looking for. These are door-to-door delivery in rural Orissa and UP right now, working with solar for filtration systems. This is in India. And this has a very clear payback because most of these people are willing to pay for the water. Of course, we can't charge them a bomb for it, but then what we charge them is the next slide I could show you. This is a project that we are kind of involved in as well as and will be in future as an investor. You could move to the next slide, please, Kavita. Next slide, sorry, not slides. So again, for cost $5,000 we're looking at some form of donor-based finance for that project where we can get some form of payback. And the paucity of time, I'm going to move to my next case study, which is basically zero energy for us is also renewable energy to some extent, because as long as we are saving water, we are also saving on the energy that would have been needed to make that, to pump that water or use that water. So this is a project that we're doing just in Maharashtra and MP right now. Maharashtra is starting with about 5,000 farmers, which is a system of rice intensification. Some of you might know it, which basically just regulates the amount of water that you use for rice field irrigation. A lot of it is flooded because these farmers take these diesel pumps for rent for an hour. Whatever water comes out, they use it. But the point is that they don't need so much water, is what we believe. And that's how these farmers are being trained to regulate their water. Because we see a problem in India, especially where you have water, people misuse water. And 200 kilometers down the road, you do not have any form of water, I mean, any a drop of water. So that needs to be managed properly. We can move on, Kavita, to the next slide and the next slide. I think I'm running out of time here, so. Yeah, agri solar pumps, all of you would, this is a big story, especially in India. And I believe that this is a story that can be replicated in most developing large population countries. Not so much the least developed countries as yet, that's my belief. But developing large population countries, this could be a very good solution, especially with governments coming into the clean energy space quite heavily now. This, again, blended can work beautifully. Most governments are putting in money on the table. That in conjunction with other forms of finance could work quite well, we believe, for the solar industry. This is an example just from India, but we do believe, and this is what we are also going to do in future, is to look at different kinds of financing mechanisms around this. Next slide, please, Kavita. Okay, and I'm going to spend some time and probably end with a lot of with this slide a little bit, maybe a little bit more on that side. There are lots of different technologies out there, and all of them, as far as we are concerned, have some form of return mechanism. If it can be complemented with some kind of philanthropic donor-based, partial guarantees or subsidized interest rates, microfinance, all of this works. We have to, drip irrigation has moved on, and we have a lot more new technologies in the drip irrigation side. They need to be looked at. Incubators need to really look at that. We have examples of treadle pumps, which has worked for years now. Ram pumps, which are doing something we are exploring as well, where you can pump water to high-level communities who are, again, very vulnerable, by the way, because of climate change and water access. Zero energy pumps that can pump up water to high altitude level people. Renewable energy for wastewater treatment, omniprocessors, these are already in operation in a lot of places. That's also a very important part of the energy water access network. We think water just wash, it's not really just wash. There's so many other elements to water access. Solar desalination plants has been working. Again, a lot more research needs to go into it to make it more energy efficient. Renewable energy will play a big part in this in the years to come. Wind power pumping systems, cycling-based systems, solar energy, WaterAid, all exist. This all needs investment, and we believe that there could be private sector investment in conjunction with other forms of finance, which could make really attractive ROIs. And I keep using the word ROI, but we all understand, and I'm sure everybody on this call understand that there is a social rate of social ROI that is beyond all ROIs. But having said that, there is always a business case as well. to be made about investments in water. So the next slide, I'm going to quickly spend about 30 seconds on the next slide, and before we can end, Kavita. This is something, climate impact funds. We are also working on some. We also invite everybody else to come together. We're working on a fund which basically will look at different kinds of climate impact, but water being a big theme. We're right now looking at solar water filtration units as one of our areas that we will clearly invest in. We are also looking at different kinds of technology solutions using blockchain and different kinds of new tech for water access is what we will be looking for. The key is blended finance with knowledge sharing, because it has to be and it has to be collaboration. And I really believe that post-COVID world, we are looking at even more collaboration than we ever had. So thank you very much. I think I'm done with that, Kavita. And thanks, Kavita, for moving the slides. And I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandeep. Now we'll be taking the questions and I'll be raising them to Sandeep and Vikas. I can already see some questions that have arrived, and I can also see some of the hands raised. I request all the attendees to kindly type in the questions so that I can read them to the speakers. So the first question is for you, Sandeep. What are the rate of returns for investing in these solutions in general?
We see that, okay, this is in general, not specific. I mean, of course, I guess that's exactly what that means. But I think about 7% to 11% is a good sweet spot. That's how we look at it. If more elements of funding can be added, that ROI goes up, but not beyond 14%. So average, I would say 7 to 14% is a good number to look at.
Question is also for you. How is the desalination market in India, and why hasn't it picked up in India? Are there opportunities with carbon financing for this sector?
Not as yet, to answer your question. Carbon financing, like I said, we use it only as a component, not as 100% for most cases, because it is very energy intensive. Desalination is energy intensive, and to power it just using renewable energy makes the renewable energy really expensive. And that is where I mentioned in my slide as well that more R&D needs to go into desalination, and it will kick off really well, you know, as we go on for coastal areas especially. But the problem right now is the energy intensiveness of desalination, and if you look at coastal areas, there are cheaper ways to get water access right now than desalination in India specifically. I'm talking about. In other countries, things are very different, but the technology cost is very high, number one, and number two, the energy intensiveness makes that technology cost even higher.
Next question is the climate fund only available in India? Sandeep, this is for you.
Is that for me? Okay, sure. Yeah, no, it's not available only for India, it's for South Asia. It could be for any country within the South Asian region. We go up to not just India, but India, Bangladesh, Nepal, the whole region as such, but not going beyond Southeast Asia. This is our comfort geography.
Okay, the next question is again for you, Sandeep. Somebody wants to know if you can explain to them how carbon finance steps into your water projects.
Well, there are two ways to it. One is if you can establish, especially for agri pumps, there is diesel use, which is a fossil fuel. If you're eliminating diesel use, carbon finance does come in a large way, because we have seen that you can save up to hundreds and thousands of liters of diesel with one program, and that being powered by solar is an obvious mitigation, and that's how carbon finance does come into picture with that. Yes. On the drinking water side, we have to establish on how many households actually boil their water before they drink. Some households do, some households don't, and that is something that we take as one of the parameters that we look at as well, because that is also reduced deforestation as well as carbon from burning firewood. But the larger case of carbon is usually on the front of pumping. That's quite a lot.
The next question is for you, Vikas. Are there any intervention by WaterAid to preserve existing water sources in the area, which is crucial for water conservation?
Well, thank you. I think there are many of our interventions which are in the space of water conservation. Most of our projects basically harp on the fact that source sustainability. When we look at any of the piped water distribution systems amongst the communities, we very inherently bring the sustainability part, which basically means the sources are replenished on a regular basis, may it be from water harvesting from rainwater or rooftop rainwater systems, or from water recycling and other such mechanisms.
The next question is for you, Sandeep.
Thank you.
Follow up to the solar pumps question. Is this largely voluntary markets or CDM? What are the current prices points for such projects?
No, I'd like to stress that I think that the 100% finance does not come from carbon finance. Let me stress that again. And number two, these are used as there is no strict price for it because a lot of this is also involved with pre-financing such interventions by climate action companies. Companies which are doing it voluntarily, but it's not a typical market-based mechanism the way people understand it. So there is climate action being taken by different kinds of companies across the globe, and in fact countries as well, because of the Paris Agreement coming into force. So these are bilateral financing mechanisms that are, there is no strict market around it. It's based on what is the funding gap and what is the mitigation cost that is coming to. And so I would not like to comment on a typical market-based, price-based. This is not typically a market-based thing. It's more of a bilaterally negotiated kind of a funding gap arrangement. But it's based on the mitigation outcome of the project. Again, a small part of it, in terms of the total financing requirement.
If somebody wants to know, do you have partner in Bangladesh for the climate fund? If yes, please let us know. Or if no, do you want any private companies to be partners?
Yes, we do. We do not have a partner. I mean, we have implementation partners in Bangladesh, but we haven't. Our fund is in a very early stage, by the way. I mean, let me make that very clear. So, I mean, we will still look at different forms of collaborations and partnerships, and we are happy to discuss that with anybody. I mean, if anybody wants to reach out to us, we're more than happy to. Yes.
Question for you. Implementation of artificial intelligence and machine learning could be probable solutions when it comes to water access. Do you have any thoughts on that?
This is a question too? I'm sorry.
Sandeep, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it will play a big role, especially in water budgeting. Typically, we are a firm believer that we need to manage water better. And I think even from Vikas's slides, it was very clear that how we can manage water. And a lot of that, if they use new tech, and we're already looking at that, where you can work with farmers on chip-based technologies which are driven by blockchains or different kinds of big data, where you can understand the soil health and the water retention capability of the salt, et cetera, using a lot of technology. And we believe that this is going to be a big thing in years to come. And we're very keen on looking at those technologies and seeing how that can be deployed in our existing projects, as well as in projects that we're very happy to get into pilots and try it out. Because we do believe there's a big play in understanding water through AI and machine learning. And it is going to be a very crucial space to watch out, and we would like to be at the forefront of that. And I would implore every large organization also to look at incubating R&D on these kind of things, because it will solve a lot of our problems in terms of monitoring activities. Today, to understand where water is lacking and where water is existing is a big lag. It's a big problem area for anybody who works in water. And I'm not an expert just on water per se. I mean, I think, but data is important, and I think AI can help a lot with data.
If I may add to this point, Sandeep, to what just Sandeep answered, I think there is a huge scope for AI, but the technology has to be cost effective, and there is a lot of role to play in terms of identifying the pockets of water and the quality of water. For example, as we said that there is a lot of dependence on the groundwater. Just take an example, India has got access to 4% of global water which is available, and it caters to almost 17% of the global population. So unless we manage the water in a proper way, and which is further compounded by the fact that if the quality is an issue, which is whatsoever is available, and secondly, the availability in different aquifers. So that's where artificial intelligence is going to play a big role. And I think, if it is cost effective, it will certainly be a game changer.
There's one question for you, and after Vikas answers that, Sandeep, I would also want your views on that. The community-owned operated models for water can be successful as ownership is a big challenge. What do you think on this, Vikas? How do you think community-owned operational models will work?
Well, I think I must compliment the question is really interesting, and there are two aspects to it. It's like a double-edged sword. If you don't manage it well, it has a recipe of failure for sure. But if it is managed well and communities are kept at the center stage of it, along with considerations on their behavioral change, their investment as well should be considered if they can afford to. And that's when it starts working, because it has to be baked over a period of some years for that to take effect, and where the intervention, I would say, intervention modulator really withdraws and community takes over. So, I would cite some elements which are critical to the success of this is, participation of communities, ensuring that they do enough water budgeting within their own areas. For example, how much water is available and what is the need corresponding to it, and how they can distribute it. And third is that what could they do for replenishing that water which is available or which is receding in that sense. So if they are able to do that, and then supplemented with the fact that the distribution system they have within the community itself, let's say I was talking about piped water distribution owned by communities itself, if they have some level of their own investments vested into that as a stakeholder, that is when the ownership will certainly start fructifying, because that's when they will start operating and maintaining it well. If there is a local economy also working in, as I cited during some of my slides, that the local economy has to work. For example, if there are plumbers in local areas available who could cater to the requirements of the breakdowns of the pipeline system, for example, if there are masons with adequate knowledge of the technology available within the communities itself, for example, if there are enough self-help groups with adequate knowledge of water quality and its testing available within the communities itself, it will certainly start fructifying. It will certainly see a level of success. And there are examples in multitude of our communities where we have withdrawn after 3 years or 4 years of our intervention, and communities have successfully taken those over itself. I'll stop here and I'll let Sandeep also answer this.
No, I think Vikas has answered it all, hasn't he? So I think not much to add there. Just that it's really important. I think it is community is the fulcrum of all these projects. Ownership, of course, and group ownership. When you say community, of course, we're meaning group ownership. Group ownership also leads to more payback, easier payback, if I may use that word, for projects. Instead of so. I think the local, like Vikas just explained, if there's a local economy, if there is a larger financial play within the communities, and they also are a financial stakeholder within the project, it helps immensely. And I think even if it's a marginal contribution, so be it. But that ownership has to be there. And local administration also plays a big part within that community building, and we can never really ignore that part. And if that puts together the community as well as local administration comes together, and if you have a solution, that's a very highly sustainable solution in the long term.
There's one more question for you. What is the exact technology for biodiversity conservation?
Sorry, who was that question for?
This is for you, Sandeep.
For biodiversity conservation, you said?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many technologies. I mean, I think all these technologies somewhere or the other help with biodiversity conservation. But if you look at the real technologies which will specifically add biodiversity conservation, of course, you're looking at groundwater recharging and aquifers. The whole concept of watershed management as such, which encompasses a lot of different things, I mean, there are a host of technologies for that. I think even Vikas could add on to that. I mean, I think some from his presentations, I saw at least 5 or 6 of those technologies that they're working on, which helps biodiversity conservation. So yeah, I mean, I think any form of ground recharging, borewell recharging, rainwater, aiding ground recharging, all of those are tried, tested technologies, and they exist actually. I mean, if you're smart about it, and also the fact that I think new technologies like what we're discussing, and as Vikas mentioned, if it's affordable, AI and all that can play a big role as well in budgeting for groundwater recharging and so on and so forth.
I think if I may add to this, most of these interventions which are aligned on either water conservation or renewable solutions on that are actually addressing a lot of problem in terms of climate as well as biodiversity within that. So if I may suggest, in terms of what we do in terms of the surface water bodies, for example, ponds, or smaller lakes and other such rivulets or streams, these are all the elements which feed the biodiversity within the local context itself. So as well as if we look at the water aquifer recharge as well, through rainwater harvesting, that also starts adding to the local context of the green cover and all that, which again feeds the biodiversity within that. Now, all these technologies which are very simple, to put, most of the times we get carried away with the fact that, the technology has to be very jazzy, or, it has to be the cutting edge technology, but that doesn't work in the local context. Local context needs local solutions and local technologies. For example, WaterAid works on many of them. Sorry. So we have something which is, in terms of desilting the dug wells, or desilting the ponds or lakes, which actually act as a recharge mechanism. We also work on certain aspects which also helps these simple filters, takes away the sand. Simple filters takes away even the fluoride effect as well in some of these cases, where the fluoride content is not very high, but it is beyond the permissible limits. So when this starts happening, automatically that starts putting backward impact on the biodiversity in that sense. So I will stop here.
Thank you, Vikas. There are some more questions which we will not be able to take up because we don't have time, but we'll be sharing these questions with the panelists, and if they choose to answer, we will be answering those questions via emails to the people who have raised those questions. So even if you have some more questions which you wanted to ask and you haven't yet, you can just write them to us and we will get them answered by the panelists. But please don't move away, because we have some interesting polls coming up, and let me just start the poll. We would want you to answer them. We will not be sharing the results here because these are the questions that we need answers to, and we want to improve your experience of the webinar. So please answer as much as you can. I'll be closing the poll in 5 seconds. I'll be closing this poll in 5 seconds. And we'll close this poll too. These are multiple option polls, so please, whichever applies, please tick them. And this is the last question. So thank you everyone for your participation in this interesting session. And thank you, Vikas and Sandeep. We will post the webinar recording on our website by next week, so please look out for it. The AVPN conference 2020 is being virtually held from 8th to 12th June. The theme of the conference is the power of networks. We will be covering many interesting discussions regarding social funding and investment in Asia. And 10th of the June is the climate day for all of you who want to attend the climate sessions. The registration is now open. Please visit conference.avpn.asia and register. Have a good day, everyone. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you very much and wish you all a safe times ahead.